Shadows dance like masquerade. Smoky room where secrets brew. I hum the night with a digga-digga-doo. Digga-digga-doo, baby, that's my tune. It rolls with the rhythm under the hazy moon. With a smoky sigh, I'll sing it true. Digga-digga-doo as the night slips through.
You don't need slaves because you still have to feed a slave, and you can still work a slave to death. So you can't mistreat them too badly. Undead, those don't apply. So what inevitably happens within the society is owning a slave becomes a status symbol. You know, for the really wealthy. Look, we have slaves. Our slaves can read and write. Can yours? Sort of thing. And so
Our slaves are the Cirque du Soleil.
yeah. So I actually played that note in that book, and Joaquin, who collaborates with me on all the Realms Lore videos, like he sponsors them. Ivan does the work with me, but Joaquin is bankrolling them all. He loves spreadsheets. He is a big businessman. It's all money. And he's worked out the gross domestic product of all the regions and kingdoms within the realms.
Really?
And he's really into
That's a real
Zastam.
That's a real love of the
Yeah.
realms.
And Zastam should take everything over. So I am working with him on what will be a follow-up book to Thay, which will be all the things he's added, which is the diplomatic corps and all this stuff. Because he's really into that. So I have to tell you, Thay would be another thing that I would personally stay off limits because I'm in the middle of doing something else with it.
Yeah, and in a lot of ways, you've drawn the picture between here and there already.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
But there are. How about Veldor, the land of monsters, which WotC destroyed?
I don't remember
It's now the Beastlands, but they didn't say anything about it. The Crinti no longer rule in not Lurin, the other one next to it, Dambrath.
Dambrath.
But they didn't tell us anything about it. Just these got destroyed in the spell plague. Yeah, what's there now? Oh, we'll get to that. And they never did.
Didn't they put a large chasm where the whole everything that was in Dwarves Deep got buried deeper?
Yep, the great rift.
When you think about,
but that could be changed as well from Second Sundering, since they haven't bothered to pull the telescope back over to that area.
No, they haven't.
I mean, so
they haven't.
I'm trying to remember. Has anything east of the Shining Plains and all that? One of the things that always gets me is all the. Here we are in Waterdeep. Then we'll zip down to Baldur's Gate. Then we'll zip down to Athkatla or over, and you skip a large swath between all that stuff on the Sword Coast, and then you get over to Cormyr and the Dragon Coast. There's a hell of a lot of territory that's never been really, truly detailed.
Yep. And they have never, ever updated the Vilhon Reach, which is a huge cradle of... And again...
I wouldn't mind playing with that, but then I'd have to do a hell of a lot of research because what's in my head is different from what's gotten in print.
Yeah, but if we do the jump, we already had, I think his name was Wheeze Einar, one of the rulers, was already picking fights with Chesenta and all the other city-states. So
and that always goes over well.
Yeah, and you just have one of them succeed in assassinating him, and then the whole area becomes a cauldron, and you can actually do here's the history of the war, and here's how it is now, and everything could be changed.
But I've cleaned the slate at least once there by just saying, and the crazy elves decide to push a tidal wave through there and wipe everything clean.
Yeah.
Almost
we can do it again.
Yeah, we could. And, almost everything south of the Sea of Fallen Stars is untouched, except maybe Chult. From a
little bit of the Lake of Steam, just edges there. But there's tons of stuff that.
And Tash Luta and the Tashalar, what they basically did with that was sink it, and that's what they did with a lot of we don't want to detail these, so we'll just sink them.
See,
And
why
so,
did they do that? We have floating icebergs of Earth and cities floating around, and we have a bunch of other sunken stuff. I mean,
yeah,
granted,
Do you
that's a
know?
great place to plant those floating
well,
cities when that ends.
Yeah.
that's because Rich Baker, and I'm to blame for this because it was during the summit for the Second Sundering.
Yeah.
He was jawing on about how he wanted to write books about armies, and he wanted to detail the war. And Liz Shue was telling him, no, sorry, you're not getting to do those books. You can't. And he was going, well, what do I get to do then? I want to do something. So I told him to go home and look up on the internet Roger Dean. And
Oh God.
he knew nothing
That's
about
where.
yeah, and he saw all the floating islands, and he said, "This is cool. I'm stealing this." And it was like, "Oh
Oops.
shit, what have I
Hey,
done?"
it could have been worse. You could have had Asia doing the soundtrack for all of fourth edition.
Oh, come on.
Hey, what's wrong with
When
Asia?
when Toto's right there?
Come on. What's wrong with Asia?
I love ascribing to that stupid internet theory that the song Africa is all about a werewolf.
I mean,
Oh dear.
Oh, I
But
made Grant wince.
no. Look, poor
It's a good
Grant has been soldiering along, trying to keep us on topic.
Well, no,
while
it's
we're
more
just
like
having fun.
I'm actually trying to help Jeff have something that makes sense.
Okay.
And I was to see
There's
how
a non-starter.
Give us some
There it
guiding
is.
questions then, interviewers.
I'll try. I do realize it's a losing proposition, but
I mean, how about areas like the Endless Waste and the Great Ice Sea? There's nothing over there. It's just blank.
Except that the Bob fanboys will jump down your throat and say, "Oh no, there was an obscure thing," and you're going, "No, there fucking wasn't."
Lands of dark peril await.
Yeah. No, I think this is a great idea.
do
And
you know what I like about Halrua is that because of the tie to Netheril and kind of some of that history and the floating cities and the ships, it actually has if you think about a continent having continuity, like geographic or cultural, historical continuity, Halrua has some of that in the far south, right? The
Right.
sky ships and stuff.
Yep.
Unlike the rest of the, and I say this, with respect, but without the rest of the FR16, the Shining South, is not as connected. But later history, as Halrua got built up and some of the stories happened, it got connected to the history of the North, even as a precursor, as a prequel.
Right.
So I wonder, as you think about the bigger continent, you say, hey, I'm going to go after Dan Brath or Lurien or some other place. How do you create that really rich history that the Sword Coast and Cormyr have, the interplay, right?
mhm.
The real problem is just trying to reconcile all of what got, because that was one of my biggest headaches when I was on staff, was everybody created everything as individual chunks.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
And nothing had any connection unless Ed provided the connective tissue before they started working. And
Yeah.
so trying to make everything interact, a lot of times, even when you leave a lot of stuff lying there, and I know I purposely did a bunch of stuff in Lands of Intrigue and Empires of the Shining Sea that led towards, okay, there are connections here that we can do with other areas, whether it's Cormyr or other things. You leave a lot of hanging plot lines and then hope that you can weave that into something.
Well, you did
It
something
doesn't
very
always
cool.
happen.
You did something super cool, Steve. And I don't know how that history happened, but King Consort Hadrak Rindon the Third, also known as Elminster's scribe, Leo, or however you pronounced it, when you did, as you did the history of Tithir, that came together, right? Just
Yeah,
things
but
like that are cool. I don't know
yeah,
how that happened,
well, that's
because Stephen did real history. He actually did something that other designers in the company vilified him for, which was to.
The floor creaks slow, but the swing feels new. I sway to the beat with the digga, digga, do.